Intrepid. This is a dice placement, engine building, cooperative game that can be played solo or multiplayer, and I played both versions. In this game, you will take on the role of scientists on the International Space Station just on the worst possible day. Bad stuff keeps happening, meteor showers, toxic leaks, everything that can go wrong will, and you need to survive and to complete a number of missions. If you're able to complete all of your missions, then you win the game. If your resources go in the negative or you take too long, then you lose the game. Resources, I mentioned, these are super important. Basically, producing resources is the heart of the game. And you always have 4 resources that you're trying to balance: nutrition, power, oxygen, and climate. So you see these 4 boards, you always use all 4, but depending on the number of players, you also only have a number of characters on them. For example, here I have the American scientist, and also so you will place a character tile there, and also different badges, so giving these characters different abilities for replay value and customization. Here we have the Russian guy. Again, depending on the number of players, fewer or more of these may have characters on them. As for these boards, they all are used to keep track of how many resources you have of each, and they all are very loose. Very loose. And also, you see, a little bit warped also, so sometimes, at least on some of them, the tiles for the characters don't really sit down easily, but the point is that you need to be very careful to constantly keep the dials aligned so that you know exactly how many resources you have of each kind. Each resource starts with a -3 showing there, and then you will place a cube indicating how much you have of that one thing. The negative numbers in the red are called the drain. That means if I'm going to produce 15 powers this turn, well, in truth, I only end up with 12 because I have a constant drain of -3. And different effects may change. The drain may change different things here. You also see that some spaces are colored and they represent objective spaces. We'll see what that means. As I said, this is a dice placement game, so each player has a number of dice. The initial number of dice is indicated there. So, for example, our American friend here starts with 2 dice. And then resources can be spent to move that cube, giving the character and the corresponding player more dice. For example, right now that would be 4. Where we're gonna place those dice, I mentioned it was a dice placement game. On the module tiles, so there is a number of them. Some are on the board at the beginning, and those would be there. As you can see, those modules have slots with certain requirements telling you what needs to go there. These, for example, for accepting slots, because you can just put any number there between 1 and 6 included. Here you will need a double of any number between 1 and 6, but it needs to be the same thing. Here, this one is slightly more finicky, but still pretty accepting, pretty welcoming. And you have a number, of course, here of empty slots where you will build further modules. You have a number of modules available on the board at the beginning. Those are the starter modules, and available to build at the beginning. They're called Tier 1. When you perform enough research, we'll see how you do that, then you will be able to unlock the Tier 2 modules that you can also build, and finally also Tier 3 and Tier 4. Again, more modules where you can when you can place your dice will become available during the game. And when you place a die in a module, or a combination of dice on a module, you will immediately gain the effect indicated there, such as to gain a die with plus or -2 of the value you put there. You may adjust one die in your pool by value 3 by +1 or -1. So you have an immediate effect. And also later, these modules will produce the resources that we need. For example, if you did place a die here, now you get the effect, and later you will produce 5 nutrition. And here, if you put a double there, a 2 or a 4, you will produce 6 nutrition and get that effect. So the idea, of course, is that modules become slowly better, that tier 2 produce more and more efficiently than tier 1 modules, and tier 3 better still, and so on and so forth. So we start each turn by rolling the number of dice that we have, and then by placing them in different locations, resolving the corresponding effects. I'm not going to resolve the effects, I'm just going to show you how things work. Because suppose I generate an extra die and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to place dice there and produce things. And sometimes that means I'm adjusting my own things. Sometimes I'm telling the player, hey, nutrition, you will get this or that. In any case, you will want to coordinate with other players because, again, there may be effects that affect each other. There's also that area there in the middle of the board which the players can use to give dice to each other. And so, for example, somebody needs a 4, and then you will take a 4 from your own personal pool, place it in that spot there, and another player can take a 4 from their own pool and place it in their own, from their supply, and place it in their own pool of active dice. Here's a closer look at that area. There's also an area there in the center where you can basically dump the extra dice that you may still have at the end of the round that you don't have anywhere else to place them. This is like the worst place in terms of efficiency, but it's better than nothing. So every die that you get, it will do something, even if maybe it will just do a little bit there. And again, see, you have 4 slots where player can exchange dice either for the same value or for a slightly different value. But it's a very limited form of interaction. 99% of the game is you're gonna manage your own puzzle, you're gonna manage your own die supply and your own modules, and from time to time you say, hey, I need a 5, and somebody says, you got it, and you get a 5, and that's all that there is. That's the entire interaction there. Or like, hey, we need to produce a lot of oxygen, and you will. But then usually in this game it's always better to produce a lot of everything. So again, that's not something that feels like super contingent to this or that. Oh, that interaction brought us to really emphasize this or that. It may happen, but not super important. Now, I'm getting distracted here. So the turn structure, as you can see, is fairly elaborate. All those steps, yes, it's good that there is a good player rate because there's a lot of management. Also, the back of these player rates, each character has one, may have unique rules because the 4 players, the 4 characters do play differently. The Japanese player, for example, has like really finicky procedure in which when you roll the dice, you need to lock the orientation. I cannot just put the 4 and the 5 the way I want. I need to exactly lock the orientation because later there will be effect that will take into account the left or the right side of a die. Anyways, after we roll and place the dice, we calculate the results, which is they generate the resources. Remember the little box there. Then we adjust the corresponding resources. That's when we say, okay, let's calculate nutrition. Every player looks at the tasks that create nutrition because some players specialize, but then other players may generate it also. And then the nutrition player will simply place the marker there to indicate how much nutrition has been produced by the team. And you do the same for the other, for climate, oxygen, and power too. Then the habitation module generated resources, which is that module there in the middle, the one where you dump the dice, you don't know what to do with. Then each die there is 1 point of any one resource that the team should decide what it is. And then you remove tokens. There are different game effects. They may place tokens on the board and on the tiles, and you remove those. That's just a little bit of upkeep. You use the resources. Now, one thing that you can also do, I should have mentioned that possibly because you need it to win. One thing that you do during the dice placement phase is that you may want to place a 1. It has to be a 1 on the active mission. Remember, these are the missions you need to complete to win the game. When you start the mission by placing a die there, then the next one is revealed, so it becomes available also. Once you start the mission, you have to keep working at it. You cannot stop it. Basically, each turn during the phase where you check the missions, you will need to spend the corresponding number of resources. Once I start this mission, I must spend power and nutrition every turn. If I fail to do so, well, we lose the game. And so by spending that amount, I get to turn the die to the next stage. So this acts as a counter. I place it there when it's a 1. At the end of this round, we must spend a power and a nutrition to turn this into a 2. Next turn, we must, whether we like it or not, spend 4 power and nutrition to turn that into a 3, and so on and so forth. Once you're at a 4 and you spend the corresponding amount of resources, it turns into 5, which is completed, and there is a benefit here because you reduce the drain. So that's how you complete the missions. So there is a certain number of turns that it will take you to complete them. There is a way of speeding them up, we'll talk about it, but still, may not be instantaneous. Resolve the mission. Trigger resource bonuses. Again, there are things that may give you extra bonuses. Check if you have... the things you extra bonuses are this. Yeah, let's talk about that. Those boxes you see there, I mentioned there are some color boxes there. If we produced enough to reach one of the boxes, we may be able to get a bonus. At the beginning, you can use any and all of those boxes. So if I produce 18 or more, I can use a bonus. However, after I use a bonus, that tracker there goes up, reducing the number of boxes that are available. Basically, the number of boxes that are available need to be higher than what you have there. So right now, I can only use bonuses. To get my bonus, I need to produce 27 or more. 18 or 22, don't cut it anymore. The resource can be that everybody gets 3 points of capacity, which is the currency we're going to use later to buy advantages, or you advance a step on a mission. And so that's kind of super important because, see, the cost for the higher tiers of a mission can be very expensive. So it seems to be a pretty safe strategy once you get there to use those resource bonuses to avoid paying 8 or 10 oxygen, for example. So again, that's what you do with the resources. Gain capacity or advance faster on the mission track. At that point, we check the minimum resource generation, meaning if anybody's in the negative, then that's when we lose the game. So first we check the mission, and even if you complete the mission, we still need to survive the step and demonstrate that we finished our missions, and we still have no resource in the negative. We calculate capacity, which is a number, again, of resource points that we gain, equal to the lowest of the 4 resources that was generated. If, for example, the lowest is 7, then everybody gains a 7 capacity here. Booyah! Finally, we resolve disasters. This is not finally. We resolve disasters. We draw a card from this deck, and that is when bad stuff happens, just to give you a sense. And there are different decks to represent different kind of problems that we may be facing. And again, this also is a timer. If by the end of this deck, when this deck is exhausted, we haven't completed all our missions, also we lose the game. Finally, we spend our capacity. Which is when we buy upgrades. This is the time when we can build new modules. Remember those to place in our station and make them available to place dice later. The cost is up here. That is the cost in capacity plus in other resources such as power, for example. And remember, you start only with a number of them, because when you build all the tier 1 modules and maybe you want more, what you're going to do? Then you need research. We can spend capacity to purchase research. Each point of research or each step on the research track costs a number of capacity equal to the number of players. So with 4 players, it takes 4 points to move that cube there, and then 4 more and 4 more and 4 more. When it gets to number 2, then tier 2 modules become available, and I think you guessed how to unlock tier 3 and tier 4. So we use capacity to increase, to move on the research track, to make new modules available, to build those modules, to obtain additional dice, meaning to move on this track here by spending the capacity printed microscopically there in between numbers of dice that you have. This is also the step where you get to use your career badge. Each character will have a unique effect based on what it says there. And also, you can buy amplify tokens that are placed on modules and will allow you to produce extra resources next round if you get to produce with that module at all. Sounds like a lot, because it is. Collect and place dice, then go through various management logistics steps, check if you lost the game, check how your missions are doing, spend capacity to buy improvements, and continue like this until you either win or you lose the game. I really wanted to like Intrepid. It looks so cool. The art on the box, the production seem pretty majestic as you open the box. Again, everything looks good. But then even just talking about the production, that also tells you when it comes to tabletop gaming, what looks good on the box and on the internet doesn't necessarily work very well on the tabletop. One thing, again, those dials being so loose, that is not great. But even if those were tighter, the game takes up a lot of space, which again, maybe you have a huge table, and that's fine. But since the game also, many of us will want to play it solitaire, then logistically it is just pretty complicated and annoying really to have to reach for different parts of the table because you are maneuvering all of these large boards. I can't escape the feel that probably there was a way that looked less spectacular, a lot humbler of having smaller tracks and smaller displays for the various resources, so that when you play with 4 players, each has their own. But when you play solo, then they're right in front of you and the game becomes a lot more smoother to play. And I've just seen, talking about the logistics, there is a lot of upkeep, there are a lot of steps, you do have to go through that player aid even after you play the game a couple of times because it's very hard to remember what is the next step. Oh, we skipped that one, let's go back and do this and do that. The overall architecture is place your dice, produce a lot of resources, do a couple of other things, and then spend your capacity. But again, if the heart of a dice placement game is placing dice, well, this is not it. Because that part actually is pretty simple and it feels pretty on autopilot after a while. I'll explain why. Because we're looking for high numbers. That's it. It's remarkable that the game gives a lot of different variants, different abilities, objectives, the boards are double-sided. These variants that, however, do not really change the experience much because ultimately we are trying to produce as much nutrition as possible, as much oxygen, as much power, as much climate as we can. That's it. There is never any reason not to. So we're just going to try to get those big numbers out as much as we can. Of course, things of other cooperative games, they're a lot more exciting, they are more tension, precisely because they give you conflicting objectives. Pandemic is a masterpiece in this, in that we need to meet somewhere to exchange information, but in so doing, we're not spreading around the board and taking care of diseases. Here, I make 50 of this, good for me, and you make as many as you can of your thing, and you make as many, and you can as many, and everybody makes as many of their thing as possible. So it's very linear. Because of this, you will probably figure out the optimal way of doing it early on, and then you're left with doing the same thing turn after turn. There is an engine building element, and you may have, if you've seen the reviews of mine of a deck of engine building games, there's one thing, I love them insofar as I am building an engine. I love building engines, but once the engine is built, I don't like engine operating games. I don't like to use the same combo, the same synergy, the same thing over and over again. Then I'm like just there, like a worker pulling the same levers, pushing the same buttons, operating the same machine. And here's what happens, because you're going to operate your engine, or most of it, or part of it, the same way every time. If you have some effects that give you extra, say, nutrition, and some effects that give you extra dice, you're gonna use those first every time, because there is no incentive to do it the other way around. Because you do those, then you don't have the extra dice. And I have that combo that allows me to change the die to that die, and that die gives me this and gives me that. From turn 2, you'll be using a lot of the same strategies over and over again. As you add new pieces to your machine, it doesn't fundamentally change. And so that is supposed to be the most exciting part of the turn, and it feels pretty, again, repetitive. And again, there isn't that much tension. I mean, I may be able to produce 18 or 19 or 20 even, depending on what I got. A little more, a little less, but ultimately the objective is always the same, which is to get as many dice as possible, to produce as much as possible, to get as high numbers as we possibly can. Again, you can then tweak the difficulty by, say, giving yourself more drain and fewer capacity. You can adjust the difficulty that way. But it still remains a very abstract exercise within the numerical field. Thematic games is always about rolling dice, shuffling cards, so you have abstract mechanics that, however, help bring a theme to life. Here, I'm looking at my dice and I need a 3 and a 3 to change that into another number that gives me that thing and that thing. It remains... after a while, if it's a solar flare or a toxic leak, if I'm the medical officer, or if I am from Russia or Japan, doesn't matter. It just feels like I need those dice to be there, and you're always doing the same thing in slightly different variants. As many dice as possible to get as many resources as possible. So alas, unfortunately the game felt disappointing. Maybe again, I had too high expectations, but I expected a fun and exciting and thematic adventure, and it felt dry, repetitive, and also, again, playing solo and not playing solo, there wasn't much of a difference there, because each player is really paying attention to their own board. The main interaction is like, hey, can I have a 5? Sure, you have a 5. Done. There isn't like a direct engagement or creating a strategy together, because strategy is always the same. Get more dice, get more resources, and try to win. And this is my review of Intrepid.